Okay, so you know how we always ask you to send us stuff that's really got you thinking?
Yeah.
Well, this time you really delivered
hmm
this blog post. It's called Mental Immunity Information as Nutrition. And wow, it really dives into some deep stuff about, building mental resilience and the kind of information we're feeding our minds, like what's actually good for us.
Right. Like what we're consuming mentally.
Exactly.
Okay.
So we thought we'd do a deep dive into this post. Really unpack the key points for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's super relevant, especially these days with so much information coming at us from every direction.
Totally. And what really struck me right off the bat was the author's take on this idea of like cognitive narrowing.
Oh, yeah. How even when people are actively searching for information, they can end up with a narrower
See, it's
perspective.
like counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
You'd think the more you search, the more open you'd become.
Yeah.
But the author points out that even those with super strong opinions, like, those who are hardcore for or against something.
Right. Like they gave the example of the vaccine debate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They can end up in these echo chambers even though they're actively trying to find evidence.
Yeah. And what's interesting is the author doesn't just dismiss these strong opinions.
No, they actually see a potential upside.
Yeah, they suggest that these individuals, with their intense drive to find supporting evidence,
Mhm.
they actually end up digging through so much information.
Right. And they might uncover things that others would just miss.
Exactly, like little nuggets of data that might get overlooked by someone with a more casual approach.
So even if their interpretation of that data is skewed by their existing beliefs, the raw information itself could still be valuable.
Exactly. That's a really important point to keep in mind. The information itself might hold value even if it's found through a biased lens.
Okay, so that's kind of hopeful. But then the author goes on to talk about how people with these strong beliefs can be more susceptible to being misled or deceived.
Right, and it's not because they're gullible, it's more about how anxiety can influence how they consume information.
Makes sense. When you're anxious about something, you're going to cling to anything that seems to confirm your fears or give you a sense of certainty.
Exactly. And the author makes this brilliant comparison to marketing and how it uses fear and scarcity to get us to buy stuff.
Like that feeling of, oh no, I'm going to miss out.
Yeah, totally. And when we're in that anxious state, our critical thinking skills take a hit.
Whether we're buying a product or a piece of information.
Right. It's like the pandemic really highlighted how susceptible we all are to this anxiety-driven information seeking.
So how do we break free from that cycle? How
Yeah.
do we get to a place where we're less influenced by anxiety when taking in information?
Well, the author talks about this idea of a path to better truth.
Okay, the path to better truth. What does that even look like?
So basically, it's about actively seeking out and engaging with perspectives that challenge our own.
Like actively looking for information that goes against what we already believe.
Exactly. It's about stress testing our beliefs against counterarguments.
So that brings us back to this idea of mental immunity, right?
Yeah.
Like how does engaging with opposing views actually make us stronger mentally?
So the idea is just like our physical immune system gets stronger by being exposed to germs, our mental immunity gets boosted by encountering diverse, even conflicting ideas.
Hmm. Makes sense.
It's like by grappling with these different viewpoints, we learn to identify weaknesses in our own thinking and we refine our understanding.
So it's not just about avoiding things we disagree with, it's about actively seeking them out.
Right. And this leads to a really interesting suggestion from the author about exposing ourselves to unconventional ideas, even those that might seem a little out there.
Like conspiracy theories.
Yeah, even those. And I know it sounds risky, but
Yeah.
the author's reasoning is that by engaging with these ideas, we can actually improve our critical thinking skills.
So it's like using these fringe theories as mental sparring partners, even if we don't agree with them.
Exactly. It forces us to examine the underlying logic, identify any logical fallacies, and understand why we might disagree. It's like a mental workout.
So it's like a vaccine.
Yeah, like a mental vaccine against misinformation.
Okay, so we've got to be open to different ideas, even uncomfortable ones. But the author also talks about the importance of long-form conversations.
Right. They
Uh,
specifically mention Joe Rogan and Lex Friedman.
Yeah, what's so special about those kinds of conversations?
Well, two things, really. First is the open-minded approach of the hosts.
Okay, so they're not just trying to prove a point, they're genuinely interested in understanding different perspectives.
Exactly. They listen, they ask questions, and they try to really get where the other person is coming from.
And that creates a space for real dialogue.
Right, not just a shouting match.
And the second thing is the long-form format itself, right?
Exactly. Because it
Huh.
allows for greater depth and nuance.
Yeah, you can't really unpack complex issues in a soundbite or a tweet.
Right. And in a long-form conversation, there's time to explore ideas, thoroughly clarify any confusion, and let the conversation flow naturally.
You can actually see the thought process unfolding.
And from this, the author introduces this concept of nutritious dialogue.
Okay, nutritious dialogue. So what makes a conversation nutritious?
Basically, it comes down to open-mindedness from the host, no strict time limits, and ideally a one-on-one format.
So it's about creating the right environment for a deep dive into a topic.
Exactly. And the author suggests that even just observing these kinds of dialogues can be beneficial for us.
Like it can help us learn how to engage with different viewpoints in a more productive way.
Right. And it all ties back to this idea of open-mindedness, which seems so central to building mental resilience.
And one of the keys to being more open-minded is this idea of separating ourselves from our beliefs.
Yeah, the author puts it really well. You are not your idea.
That's a powerful statement.
It is. It's about recognizing that our beliefs are not who we are.
So how do we actually do that? How do we separate ourselves from our ideas?
Well, the author suggests that it often comes from these big life experiences.
Like what kind of experiences?
Things like being deceived or facing a major loss or going through some kind of adversity that really shakes things up.
So it's those moments when our world gets turned upside down.
Exactly. And those experiences can force us to reevaluate what we believe.
It's like realizing that our current understanding of things is just that current.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the whole truth.
And it might even be wrong.
Right. It's a humbling realization, but it's also really freeing.
It is, because it allows us to detach our sense of self-worth from our beliefs.
So we don't have to feel like we're a bad person if we change our mind about something.
Exactly. And the author also emphasizes this idea of focusing on the what of an argument rather than the who or the how.
Okay, so the content itself versus who's saying it and how they're saying it.
Right. Because our emotional reactions can really get in the way of us seeing the actual point.
Like we might get so hung up on who's saying something or their tone that we completely miss the substance of their argument.
And as we talked about before, anxiety just amplifies that tendency.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I remember a time when I was so attached to a certain belief, and anytime someone challenged it, I felt like they were attacking me personally. It took me a while to realize that I wasn't my belief.
Right. You're not defined by your ideas.
And this all connects to that analogy of information as nutrition, right?
Absolutely. The author compares information to food and talks about junk food information.
So what's junk food information?
It's basically information that lacks a balanced perspective. It's often presented with a predetermined conclusion and designed to reinforce biases.
So it's like empty calories for the mind.
Exactly. It might be entertaining or even feel good in the moment, but it doesn't really nourish us intellectually.
And the author takes it a step further and says that media that presents a clear-cut conclusion is actually disrespectful to the audience. That's a bold statement. Why do they say that?
Well, they argue that by giving us a neat and tidy conclusion, it prevents us from engaging with the information ourselves and forming our own understanding.
Like it's dumbing us down.
Exactly. It's like we're being spoon-fed instead of being allowed to chew on the ideas ourselves.
And this ties into their critique of the capitalist profit engine, right?
Yeah, they point out how the pursuit of profit can incentivize the creation of information that's attention-grabbing and emotionally charged, even if it's not necessarily true or helpful.
So the focus becomes hooking the audience and keeping them engaged, even if it's at the expense of accuracy or nuance.
Right. And this system isn't really concerned with fostering critical thinking or promoting mental well-being.
It's a pretty sobering thought that the systems that shape our information environment might actually be incentivized to provide us with less nutritious content.
Yeah.
And the author even cautions that narratives framed around ethics and justice can be used within this profit engine as manipulative tools.
Yeah, even those stories that seem virtuous on the surface.
So we need to be careful even with narratives that seem to be on the right side of things.
Exactly, because even those narratives can be co-opted or used to push a specific agenda.
And the author warns that none of us are immune to this.
Right, we all have to be vigilant.
And finally, the author talks about this tendency to blame external forces for being deceived without looking inward at our own role in the process.
Yeah, it's easier to point fingers and say, I was tricked, than to acknowledge our own biases and how they might have led us astray.
It's like that classic blame the victim mentality.
But by refusing to take responsibility for our own part in being misled, we're actually preventing ourselves from learning and growing.
So it's all about taking ownership of our own mental processes and recognizing that we have a choice in how we consume and process information.
Right. And that brings us to the end of the post where the author references some really thought-provoking ideas.
Yeah, they mentioned the Japanese filmmaker Ohen's thoughts on war responsibility.
Right. And then there's the Zen Pencils comic about the two wolves.
Okay, so how do these references tie everything together?
Well, they serve as a call to action. They're reminding us that we have a responsibility to keep learning, to update our understanding of the world, and to manage our anxieties.
And to engage in respectful dialogue, even with those we disagree with.
Exactly. And the two wolves analogy is really powerful. It says that we all have a good wolf and a bad wolf inside us.
Like a good side and a bad side.
Right. And the one that wins is the one we feed.
So it's about consciously choosing which wolf to nourish.
Exactly. And the author expresses a hope for more constructive dialogue and a willingness to keep working on ourselves and our internal battlegrounds.
Rather than giving in to division and conflict.
Right. It's a really hopeful message.
So to recap for you, the listener, this deep dive into mental immunity information as nutrition is all about taking an active role in shaping your mental landscape.
Right. It's about being open to diverse viewpoints, even those that challenge you.
And it's about prioritizing the content of information over the source or the delivery.
And remembering that long-form, open-minded conversations are a valuable source of mental nourishment.
So as you go about your day and encounter all this information, I want you to think about that two wolves analogy. Which wolf are you feeding with your information choices? And what does that mean for you and for the people around you?
Yeah, that's a powerful question.
And maybe even take a moment to reflect on a time when you successfully let go of a belief that you used to hold really strongly.
What did that experience teach you?
What did you learn about yourself and the world?
That's something worth thinking about.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, this was a good one.
Until next time.
See you.